verses 17 to 24. And we've always got Bibles on the desk. We're reaching behind to try and find one. Ephesians 4, 17 to 24. Now this I say, and testify in the Lord, that you must no longer walk as the Gentiles do in the futility of their minds. They're darkened in their understanding, alienated from the life of God because of the ignorance that is in them, due to their hardness of heart. They have become callous and have given themselves up to sensuality, greedy to practice every kind of impurity. But that is not the way you learned Christ, assuming that you heard about him and were taught in him as the truth is in Jesus. To put off your old self, which belongs to your former manner of life and is corrupt through deceitful desires, and to be renewed in the spirit of your minds, and to put on the new self created after the likeness of God in true righteousness and holiness. As you get the sense from the text, it's only about 8 verses long. This is a passage that has a lot to do with our minds, okay? Our perspectives. So no apologies. This is going to be a bit of a thinking sermon. I'm going to begin with, if you want to go to the first slide, I'm going to begin with some about a page of thoughts from Leslie Newingen. He was a missionary in India for 30 years. He's a missiologist. I love much of what he writes. I wouldn't agree with everything he says. He's kind of a centrist. People on the left love him about some things and don't like him about some things. People on the right love him about some things, don't love him about some things. So just so you know who you're hearing, this is from his book, The Gospel in a Pluralistic Society. But I think we're right in the same place of what Paul's talking about. Some things we've got to think about. Culture. A whole way of understanding and ordering things which is embodied in language, story, all the forms of social life which are made possible through a shared language and shared story. Most of this we learn, or perhaps we might say absorb as children, as we learn to walk and talk and share the story of our culture. Normally, we just take it for granted. We're not conscious of it because we don't look at it like our glasses. I'm still quoting Newingen. It's something we look through, not at, so that we can see everything else. Every culture depends for its coherence on a set of plausibility structures. That's the phrase you're going to hear until you want to throw something at me, so just get ready for it. Plausibility structures. Patterns of belief and practice accepted within a given society which determine which beliefs are plausible to its members and which are not plausible. Thus, when in any society a belief is held to be reasonable, it's the judgment made on the basis of the reigning plausibility structure. For us, that reigning plausibility structure is humanism in the West today. Throughout history, the Bible had more and more to justify itself at the bar of naturalistic reason. Insofar as it appeared it could not do so. The tension grew into a separation. The Bible became the book through which the life of the soul, the interior life, the spiritual life, was interpreted, at least for those who wanted to stay under its influence. The Bible could not hold its own in the public sphere. The catechism can no longer be part of the curriculum of the public schools, right? There could be what's called religious studies because religion is a part of the lives of all people. It's a fact of human life. But the things that religious people believe, they're not facts. Only what can stand up under the critical examination of modern scientific method can be taught as fact, as public truth. This is all Leslie Newingen, by the way. It's therefore natural that the missionary, the evangelist, with his confident assertion of a truth that can be accepted by faith, should be the object of suspicion, or at least skepticism. Must we not all accept that truth is larger, richer, and more complex than can be contained in any one religious cultural tradition? Is it not more fitting that we adopt the attitude of a humble seeker after truth, keeping an open mind ready to listen to all that comes from the varied religious experiences of the human race. He wrote this in the 1960s, by the way, not 2018. He continues, how in this situation does one preach the gospel as truth? Truth which is not to be domesticated within the assumptions of this plausibility structure, but which challenges these assumptions and calls for their revisions. It's not a secret. The gospel gives rise to a new plausibility structure, a radically different vision of the things that shape all human cultures. The church, therefore, as the bearers of the gospel, inhabits and lives out a plausibility structure that's in conflict with and calls into question those that govern all human cultures. By the acceptance of this new plausibility structure, the gospel, all human experience can be rightly understood. It is the light by which things are seen as they really are, and without which they are not truly seen. It's a new fact. It claims to be the truth, not just a possible opinion. It is the rock which must become either the foundation for all knowing and doing, or else the stone on which one stumbles and falls to disaster. End of Lizzie Nubia. Go ahead and pop it up. I worked hard. I've been working in Hebrew and Greek for 20-some years, so I do this. I worked hard to give you a translation to draw out some of what's here. This is my translation. Same text we just read in the ESV. Therefore, this I say and commend in the Lord, you are no longer to walk just as the people walk in their cultures. So in other words, Gentiles, right? Not a real useful word these days. Great biblical word, I'm not tossing it out, but we're talking about the way people walk in their cultures, in the futility of their perspective or their plausibility structure. Those who are in the dark in their understanding, those who are alienated from the life of God by the ignorance they share, by the hardness of their hearts. Such people, having numbed themselves, give themselves over to license without restraint to accomplish every degrading possibility greedily. People walk out, people live out life according to the reigning plausibility structure. It's like if you're a fish and you're in a fishbowl, it's the water that you're swimming in. You don't think about it. You just go with it. In Ephesians 4, God's inviting us, take off the glasses. As we consider Jesus, as we continue, as we talk about how do you walk out your life, take off the glasses. And he describes the glasses then that we usually see through. The culture around us doesn't live according to the facts. It lives according to a plausibility structure that tells us what we can do with the facts and what we can't do with the facts. Cultures that dismiss our Maker, the one living God, produce something. That's where this goes. It produces something with a shared ignorance of God. So ESV does a great job as it says that they are ignorant of God and they have hard hearts. But I think the context here is in the culture. There is a shared assumption that God isn't a part of things. There's a shared ignorance of the reality of God, a shared hardness of heart. And when that's the case, people and cultures give themselves over to license without restraint to accomplish every degrading possibility greedily. Matt's in the next section of Ephesians next week. He's going to be preaching to you. And in one sense, you could say he's going to be talking about what happens when we just give license to our mouth. When we give license to our hands, because we don't want to work, we want to steal. There's all kinds of ways we could look at in Ephesian culture. What happens when license without restraint just rolls forward, accomplishing every degrading possibility greedily? Well, the week after next, the subject at hand in Ephesians is sex. So that's where I'm going to go right now and consider that topic. Next slide. Matthew Ruger gives us a great book, and he does all kinds of research on sexuality in the Greco-Roman culture. So let me just tell you Let me just paint you a picture of sexuality in Ephesus at the time that this letter comes. And you tell me if it isn't a picture of this. I got to find my phrase again. License without restraint. Sexual orientation was not a fixed concept at this time. Surprise, surprise, that's not new. Homosexuality was praised, though in the case of men it was better not to be the receiving female-like partner. This is absolutely normal among the Greeks and among the Romans for different reasons. Pederasty, that is sex with boys, was common among both cultures. The public gymnasium was the hothouse, the place where men taught boys all about this. This was normal behavior. Adultery was illegal for wives. Prostitution was as common and necessary as water. You have to understand, prostitution was part of going to church. When you worship Artemis and Zeus, etc., etc. Get that picture. This is how your boys are going to come of age. You're going to take them to church to have sex with a prostitute. Thus, an Ephesian man, in any given week, had the unrestricted license to have sex with his wife, his slaves, male and female, prostitutes at the temple, male and female, a mistress or two, and boys at the gym. I'm not trying to, I know this is overwhelming. This is the reality. Because are the Ephesians just immoral people? No, because they have this reigning plausibility structure in which they have rejected the living God, and they believe in gods who are just super sexy versions of themselves who want everything they want. That's why worship is designed to turn the gods on and give them what they want. What about us? What about our Western plausibility structure? I'm working with lots of authors this week. I love to read. John Davis has written a book about worship, and he captures our tensions in the Christian, as Christians in the West today. Next slide. Here's the quote. If you can read it, you can kind of follow some things. Scientific naturalism expresses a reality in which God is either unreal or distant, in which humans are in control of their world. Material objects are more real than spiritual or mental objects, and that which is the evidence of the senses is the basis of knowledge. And so the Christian living under the conditions of scientific modernity is constantly exposed to a process of mental conditioning, plausibility structure, that denies or calls into question the believer's fundamental conviction, God, not matter, is ultimate reality. It's the point of Ephesians 11 going into 12. Before matter existed, God spoke. God is fundamental, matter is secondary. So here's my question. Does Davis capture our situation? Well, let's do a checklist here. Is God considered unreal or distant in the West? Check. Who is it that must get done what needs to get done in our world? Gods or people? Check. Are material objects more real than spiritual and mental objects? Yeah, absolutely. Check. Are the facts of life defined by empirically verifiable knowledge? What gets to be public knowledge? What can you call facts in the public square? Only science and math. Check. Is truth made equally valid by our personal experiences? All personal experiences equally valid, right? Check. Notice the last two do not go together. They don't work together. The facts of life are defined by empirical, verifiable knowledge. We check that box. Oh, but all our experiences are equally valid. They do not work together. They are nonsense together. Why do we hold to them? Because the plausibility structure of the West, humanism, says, keep those two. They go together. Trust me. They go together. All right? Yet we are no longer to walk just as the people walk in their cultures. You can go forward. In the futility of their perspective, their plausibility structure. Those who are in the dark in their understanding, because They are alienated from the life of God by the ignorance of God's reality that they share, by the hardness of their hearts. Such people, having numbed themselves, give themselves over to license without restraint to accomplish every degrading possibility greedily. Is that true about our culture? Is that just being sort of judgmental and harsh? Well, again, let's connect some dots on sexuality. In our culture, we could do this with all kinds of, you could do this with economics. You could do this with race theory. You could do this with the issue of shame. It's so important. But go ahead and connect the dots with me again. I need you to think. Sex as belonging in marriage only is out. Why? Is it because that sexual ethic was restrictive and constrained people's sexual freedoms? Is that why? Am I in the ballpark? Is that why that changed? Okay, so now, teenagers as early as age 13 in our public schools are taught they should give themselves to sexual pleasure without any restraints but birth control. They should not be constrained by their age. They should not be constrained by their gender. They should not be constrained by the gender of those they have sex with. They should not be constrained by their ability to support any children that might result. They should not be constrained by the outdated view of their elders. Your parents don't need to know about these things. They are told. Why? Am I right? It's because our sexual ethic must not be restrictive or constrain people's sexual freedoms in any way. Is that what's going on? One I didn't have on my list, and so then let's make sure we somehow, through taxes, publicly fund condoms in every school, right? The research I have shows that increased teen pregnancies by 10%. Okay? So let's just keep rolling the ball. How about when unplanned children result from the unrestrained license that we must not be constrained by? Well, when that happens, don't be constrained by the biological reality of a human being in the womb. In our culture, you need to be free to kill the baby without moral or legal constraint. Do I have a fair picture? I'm not trying to be mean to anybody. Is that what this is about? Okay, single-parent homes, particularly parents, homes without a father. They're a part of this chain of license without constraint and what it produces. Finally, children who are brought into our Western world will no longer be constrained by birth certificates that assign gender. Why? Because to acknowledge that their DNA, their genitals, their hormonal biology is either male or female is to restrict or constrain the child from being whatever they want to be. The point isn't to wag our finger at those sexually immoral people. It all flows out of what you think reality is. My only point in this chain of sexuality is each step of license without constraint makes the next step possible and inevitable. I'm going to say it again. Each step of license without restraint not only makes the next step possible, it makes it inevitable. Which is why we could add a number of other things to the list. We have a different plausibility structure. We have a maker who designed our biological relational potential, including sexual pleasure and benefit, for the context of responsible, faithful union of one man and one woman. And so we don't have, it's not about pointing fingers at people, but it's very simple. We don't view license without restraint as the high moral ideal that our culture does. Next picture. What happens when you are walking and you come to this intersection and you've got a 3-year-old with you? What are you going to do?
Hold their hand.
You're going to hold their hand or pick them up. Okay, very good. All of us knows that there are times that restraint and constraint are good. We all know that there are times when restraint and constraint are abusive. They're evil. They're hurtful. Fine. But that's not true of restraint and constraint at all times. So we come back to the sidewalk with the 3-year-old. Until they're able to show the appropriate personal restraint necessary to make it across that intersection alive, you're going to help them grow by providing restraint. How about when they're 16? They going to cross the road by themselves?
Yeah.
We certainly hope so. We certainly hope so. But I think that we're going to let them walk across that street without taking their hand or picking them up when they demonstrate the maturity of self-restraint. Restraining themselves and crossing when it's safe is a sign of maturity. Do you agree? I need to say it again. Is self-restraint in this example of the sidewalk, is it show maturity? Is that what it's a demonstration of? Listen carefully. Why in our culture, in our reigning plausibility structure, why do we consider throwing off all restraint such an essential value for being a fully mature human being? Whose idea was that? The answer, according to Ephesians, is that it has everything to do with freeing ourselves from the constraints of the living God, his realities, and that maturity that we're invited to. Because of the birth, virgin birth, the life, the words, the death, the resurrection, the Spirit he gives, the fact he is coming back. Because of all of this about Jesus, we have a different plausibility structure. We're not trying to fit him in the usual plausibility structure. When we do that, it does not work. It's why many Christians are frustrated and walk away. Being a humanist and being a Christian, they're just going to cause you a headache. So I remember when my Aunt Carol next taught me to smoke. So my brother and I, we were maybe 8 or 10 years old. Aunt Carol smoked like a smokestack, and she's a lovely lady, but and she eventually quit. But at that point in time, she was a smoker. And we're in the back seat, and she's lighting up, and so us boys, we said, well, we'll have a smoke. And Aunt Carol hands the cigarette back. Really? Yeah, go ahead. So I take the cigarette and I go, right? Some of you know how this works. Do my little puff, puff, puff. And she says, no, Brian, that's not how it works. Give me the cigarette. So I hand her the cigarette. She goes, you breathe through it like you're snorkeling. You just take a deep, deep breath, Brian. That's how you smoke a cigarette. And she hands the cigarette back to me. Oh, okay. I did that. I have never touched a cigarette since. My aunt, who wasn't perfect, she did a really wise thing. She didn't want me piddling around with cigarettes. She wanted me to take a deep drag so I knew what I was dealing with. Right? That's what Ephesians has invited us to. That's the hard work I've invited you to do. Okay? I try and walk with the text. We've had to do. I've asked you to take a deep drag of the reigning plausibility structure of our culture, not so we can wag our finger at it, but so that we really take the glasses off and look at it. It's about as fun as that deep drag on a cigarette. I'm certainly not encouraging anybody to smoke, but if you're going to try it that way. That'll pretty much carry you. Second part of the passage, as we come to verse 20, it all shifts. And I want to use my aunt's example sort of contrary to what she intended. Here in Ephesians 4, we need to not piddle around with Jesus either. We need to take a deep, deep drag of Jesus instead of just piddling around. All right? Ephesians 4:20 reads this way in the ESV. But that's not the way you learned Christ, assuming that you've heard about him and were taught in him, as the truth is in Jesus. Is this a metaphor, this hearing about Jesus thing? When we read our Bibles, are we reading what others say about God? Do we learn about Jesus from pastors and parents and the Bible? Is that how we learn about Jesus? Is that how faith and discipleship grow and happen? When we read the Gospels, are we reading traditions about Jesus? Because I would suggest that all of that is just really the way the reigning plausibility structure of humanism has taught you to read. Jesus explained to us that the New Testament, the words of the apostles, are actually Jesus' words. Let's go to John 16 if you've got a Bible. John chapter 16. again, I just feel the weight of this. We don't want to be piddling around with the words of Jesus. We need to breathe them in deeply. John 16, I'll read verse 7, and then I'll jump to 12 through 14. John 16, 7. Jesus says, "Nevertheless, I tell you the truth. It is to your advantage that I go away. For if I do not go away, the Helper will not come to you. But if I go, I will send him to you." Jump to verse 12. Listen to verse 12. "I still have many things to say to you, but you cannot bear them now. When the Spirit of truth comes, he will guide you into all the truth. For he will not speak on his own authority, but whatever he hears, he will speak. And he will not declare to you things, and he will declare to you things that are to come. He will glorify me, for he will take what is mine and declare it to you." Friends, in the Gospels, Jesus himself speaks to us. In the epistles and the rest of the New Testament, Jesus himself, by means of the Spirit, is speaking the things that the apostles were not yet ready to hear. Now, in the Spirit, in Ephesians, Jesus is speaking to you, to me. All right, go to the next one. Next one. Back one. Thank you very much. I love the ESV. I'm not a fan of its translation of this verse. NAU, CSB, CEV all wrestle with this. Look at the New American Updated. "But you did not learn Christ in this way, if indeed you have heard him," not heard about. And I think they're right. If in fact you've heard him and been taught in him just as the truth is in Jesus. Go to the next one. And that's why I translate it this way. "But you, this is not how you learn the Messiah, since you heard him and were taught by him, just as the truth is in Jesus." When we read our Bibles with our eyes, we are hearing the words of God, the words of Jesus, who is himself teaching us to see all things according to his plausibility structure. If somebody leaves a note for you in the kitchen on the counter and you read it and it has some directions, do you carry them out? Do you? Did they talk to you? They talked to you in text. They talked to you on paper. They spoke to you. They did it through paper. If you get a text from somebody but you don't hear them with your ears and they say, "Hey, stop and get some milk on the way home." Hopefully, husbands, you do. But are you being spoken to? Yep. But it's just text. What if the text is a week old and it's, "Hey, will you order this book for me on Amazon?" And you just find it. Can you still listen to that text? This is the most essential truth we have to gently disciple our children in. They're going to feel torn in half living in the reigning plausibility structure of humanism in North America while attempting to live life in reality of Jesus. Just ask them. They already do. This tension is no small thing. We have to pay attention to nurturing and guiding them to live first and foremost, fully confident in the reality of Jesus and his voice in the Bible. Not just the morality we want it to produce. It will not work that way. It doesn't. We must not use our Bibles to teach them about Jesus. That's just piddling with the cigarette. We must let Jesus teach them himself in their Bibles. I will say it again. We must let Jesus teach them himself in their Bibles. He's speaking. Jesus is here this morning. I'm certainly not saying everything I'm saying is Jesus. But you do need to know the difference, because he will be heard at times in a faithful pastor. Are we listening to him? When we pull out our Bible to read to our children, are we listening to Jesus teach us? Because if we don't, how will the children? If we grab a Bible storybook and read stories about Jesus instead of reading the Bible and letting Jesus talk to them. I'm not saying never use a Bible storybook. I'm not saying. There is a difference. So finally, when we listen, Jesus himself will teach us many things. In particular, here in Ephesians, there are 3 things. You see them highlighted. Love the grammar in the New Testament. So, since you heard him and were taught by him, Just as the truth in Jesus is a little bit of an aside, there's nothing aside about it. It's terribly important. But leave it out and you can see it. Since you heard him and were taught by him, to put off. See it? To be renewed and to put on. There are three things in particular Jesus will. There's many things Jesus wants to talk to you about, but what's drawn into focus in Ephesians, are you listening to Jesus teach you to put off the product of your former way of life, to put off the reigning plausibility structure that we all swim in, to put off the old man, that identity? I learned some good things from my dad, but I got a terrible identity from my dad. He didn't know the Lord. Identities that are corrupted when we let desire define what's good and right instead of trusting God to define what's good and right. Desires aren't inherently bad, friends. They're not. Many of them are good, but when God's version of what's good and our desires disagree, Christians trust God, and that's what it means to put off the former way of life. Why don't we listen to Jesus? Should we listen to Jesus? Teach us, guide us to put off the former way of life. In particular, you can read any of the Gospels, but I'm going to read mostly from John this morning as we listen to Jesus, because John the Apostle and Mary, the mother of Jesus, lived in Ephesus at this time. You can be sure that the people of Ephesus had heard John's Gospel. If you want to read Ephesians well, read John's Gospel first. Fascinating. Okay? They've heard Jesus because they've heard John. And what does John tell them? John tells them the things that he wasn't ready to hear until the Spirit spoke. John 3, I'm in verses 4 through 8, about putting off. Nicodemus says to Jesus, how can a man be born when he's old? Can he enter a second time into his mother's womb and be born? Jesus answered, truly, truly, I say to you, unless one is born of water and the Spirit, he cannot enter the kingdom of God. That which is born of the flesh is flesh. That which is born of the Spirit is spirit. Do not marvel that I said to you, you must be born again. The wind blows where it wishes and you hear its sound, but you do not know where it comes from or where it goes. So it is with everyone who is born of the Spirit. I want to read from Mark 7. Jesus taught you. You've probably read Mark 7, most of you. It's astounding the overlap of Mark 7 and the passage we're in Ephesians. Yes, Jesus is teaching us to put off some things. Mark 7, beginning at verse 14. And he called the people to him and he said, hear me, all of you, understand. There's nothing outside a person that by going into him can defile him. The things that come out of a person are what defile him. When he'd entered into the house and left the people, the disciples asked him about the parable. And he said to them, then are you also without understanding? Don't you see whatever goes into a person from the outside can't defile them? It doesn't enter his heart, but his stomach, and then it's expelled. Thus he declared all foods clean. But here's where I want you to listen. Well, I want you to listen to all of it. It's Jesus, not me. Don't read, look at me for a second. You might read a passage like this thinking, I wonder what God's going to say to me today in this passage. I'm reading Luke 7, 14 through 23. Do you know what God's saying? He's saying Luke 7, 14 through 20. Every word is the word of Jesus. That's what he's saying to you today. Now, something may be impressed as in particular to be applied. But what is Jesus saying? He's saying, Mark 7, verses 14 through 23. We pick it up at 20. What comes out of a person is what defiles him. For from within, out of the heart of man, come evil thoughts, sexual immorality, theft, murder, adultery, coveting, wickedness, deceit, sensuality. That's the term I'm translating as I lost it. That's the term that I'm translating as license without restraint, okay? Because it doesn't always pertain to sexuality. All these evil things come from within, and they defile the person. So, in terms of putting off, you've heard Jesus. You've been taught by him. Amen? All right. What's the second thing? To be renewed by the Spirit in your perspective, in your mind. You've heard Jesus on this, haven't you? Hasn't he taught you and guided? We're going to go back to John 15, okay? Let's hear Jesus. Certainly John 3 spoke of the new birth, the need to be born again. I'm going to pick it up in John 15, verse 26 and 27. But when the Helper comes, whom I will send to you from the Father, the Spirit of truth, who proceeds from the Father, he will bear witness about me. And you also will bear witness, because you have been with me from the beginning. Now in chapter 16, we'll jump to verses 5 through 14. We read part of this earlier. Now, I'm going to him who sent me, and none of you asks me, where are you going? Because I said these things to you, your sorrow has filled your heart. Nevertheless, I tell you, it's to your advantage that I go away, for if I don't go away, the Helper will not come to you. But if I go, I will send him to you. And when he comes, he will convict the world concerning sin and righteousness and judgment. Concerning sin, because they don't believe in me. Concerning righteousness, because I go to the Father. And you will see me no longer. Concerning judgment, because the ruler of this world has been judged. I still have many things to say to you, but you cannot bear them now. When the Spirit of truth comes, he will guide you into all truth. There's a putting off of who we were, that way of thinking and all that it brings. There's a seeing that happens as we listen to Jesus and renewed by the Spirit he gives. And finally, there's a putting on. The new man, the product of God's recreation in righteousness and true holiness. The new identity. I remember there's a song Sarah Grove sings. Some of you may know Sarah Grove. And there's a line in there based on one of the Psalms. And I had to ask Julie, what Psalm was that? Psalm 84:11. This is an astounding thing. Psalm 84:11. The Lord God is a sun and a shield. The Lord bestows favor and honor. No good thing does he withhold from those who walk uprightly. No good thing. Not no thing, but no good thing does he withhold. Putting on the new man means we trust God to define the good things and to empower us to seek them. Would you like to listen to Jesus teach you about this? He's much better than your pastor, let me tell you. How about from John 15 again, beginning in verse 1. Listen to Jesus. Don't listen for what he might say, because every word is him. I am the true vine, and my Father is the vine dresser. Every branch in me that does not bear fruit, he takes away. Every branch that does bear fruit, he prunes, that it may bear more fruit. Already you are clean because of the word that I've spoken to you. Abide in me, and I in you. As the branch cannot bear fruit by itself unless it abides in the vine, neither can you, unless you abide in me. I am the vine, you are the branches. Whoever abides in me and I in him, he it is that bears much fruit. For apart from me you can do nothing. If anyone does not abide in me, he's thrown away like a branch and withers. The branches are gathered, thrown into the fire, and burned. If you abide in me, my words abide in you, ask whatever you wish, it'll be done for you. By this my Father is glorified, that you bear much fruit, and so prove to be my disciples. As the Father loved me, so I've loved you. Abide in my love. If you keep my commandments, you will abide in my love, just as I have kept my Father's commandments and abide in his love. It's my favorite part now, verse 11. These things I've spoken to you, that my joy may be in you, and that your joy may be full. So, Ephesians 4, my Aunt Carol. They're a little different, but they have a little overlap, okay? And so I've desired to faithfully shock you with breathing deeply, the reigning humanistic plausibility structure, taking the glasses off, taking a look at it, and calling us back. So we're not just piddling around with the one who can renew and restore our lives when we drag deeply every word. Because we're not just learning about Jesus, we're learning from Jesus, we're hearing Jesus. When we read, when we listen. This change alone in our lives will open the door to the Holy Spirit renewing us, putting off the old ways of thinking that produce things, and putting on a very new way of thinking that will produce good things. So, I'm going to give you a moment for prayer. Go to the next slide. I've punched a number of thoughts up there that for me become things I want to pray about after being in Ephesians 4, 17 through 24. I just plopped those up there. Julie's going to come back in a moment and we've got a last song. I'll putz at the piano a little bit. Begin to think and pray, okay? Begin to pray. Begin to talk to Jesus about these things and plan to talk to each other about them. You want to go nabber?